treasure trove of documents has been released by the Washington Post, who went to court for several years in order to get a hold of them, that shows that the U.S. government has lied throughout the 18-year in Afghanistan. These documents are explosive and show that the government willingly and deliberately lied to the American public about the entire conflict. More than 2,000 pages of previously unreleased reports of interviews of people who played a direct role in planning and carrying out it, from generals to diplomats and aid workers to Afghan officials. They have known that they were losing the war basically from the beginning, and basically knew that they could not win. Yet they told the public the exact opposite from what was in these reports. The U.S. government tried to shield the identities of the vast majority of those interviewed for the project and nearly concealed all of their remarks. For example, when somebody was interviewed about it, they would essentially just cover it up, and in some cases deny they ever spoke to the person, and then just told the public whatever it is that they wanted. Now, the Post won the release under the Freedom of Information Act after a 3-year battle. Right, the Washington Post fought for 3 years to get a hold of these documents that should have been made available to the public from the beginning. Since 2001, more than 775,000 U.S. troops have been deployed to Afghanistan, many repeatedly. Of those, 2,300 died, and more than 20,589 have been wounded in action, according to Defense Department figures. Now, the U.S. officials acknowledged that their warfighting strategies were fatally flawed, and that Washington wasted enormous amounts of money on trying to remake Afghanistan into a modern nation. The Defense Department, State Department, and U.S. Agency for International Development have spent or appropriated between $934 billion and $978 billion, according to an inflation-adjusted estimate calculated by Netta Crawford, a political science professor and co-director of the Costs of War Project at Brown University. Those figures do not include money spent by other agencies such as the CIA, Department of Veteran Affairs, which is responsible for the medical care for wounded veterans. These documents show that it was common at the military headquarters in Kabul and the White House to distort statistics to make it appear that the United States was winning the war when it was not the case. And this is by no means something that was just Trump. It was Trump, it was Obama, it was Bush. All three of these presidencies not only knew they were losing the war, but knew that they essentially could not win. Yet endless amounts of money, almost $1 trillion, have been spent in trying to fight a conflict that has no end in sight, and knew they could not win. The suffering, the killings of about 1.5 million Afghanis, essentially for nothing. All for the U.S. empire to gain control of the mineral wealth of Afghanistan. Even the claim that Osama bin Laden was in Afghanistan, or that Afghanistan was harboring him, has become suspect. And that maybe even the justification for the invasion might not have been wholly legitimate to begin with. So despite all this bluster by right-wingers about caring about the troops and wanting them, their lives to be used properly, and they defend their country, here it is, a massive ongoing lie that 2 Republican presidents have been lying about. So they can't just pass this off on Obama and say it was the liberals' fault. This was, 2/3 of it was them. And that they already knew they couldn't win. Which begs the question, why do you engage in a war that you know you can't win? 2 primary reasons. 1, make sure Afghanistan doesn't fall under the orbit or the sphere of influence of another country, like Iran, or possibly now, even Iraq. It's important to make sure that doesn't happen, and to try to prevent a broader anti-imperialist alliance throughout the Middle East. Now, granted, there was some of that to a large degree in 2001. You had Several states are along those lines, but the growing power of Iran over the last several years has, particularly even the last 10 years, has been a high priority for the United States to undermine. Second, funneling unending amounts of money into the defense industry. Now, this is significant for two reasons. One, makes the capitalist class very happy, makes them a ton of money. And two, the military-industrial complex is not exactly like it was previously described. It's not that, it's not the warning that we were given that it had too much influence over the government. It'd be better to say the defense industry has too many jobs. A tremendous amount of employment is in the defense industry in the United States. That's one of the few domestic jobs that's actual decent paying domestic jobs that are left, which receives a massive amount of subsidies from the United States, also known as the imperialist war machine. If there was to be any significant reduction in military spending, those jobs would be devastated. Those companies would be devastated. And this shows that despite imperialism being necessary for the continuation of capitalism, the expanding of markets, etc., monopoly phase and all that, but even on the home front in terms of employment, they need it to continue. This is their Keynesianism for the United States. Basically, mass amounts of subsidies into the defense industry to prop up jobs. This was one of the problems with the end of the Cold War. Basically, all that military spending was no longer necessary. The big, bad, scary Soviet Union was no longer a threat once it no longer existed. And there was no justification for Cold War spending when the Cold War was over. I wouldn't list this as like some kind of a conspiracy to fabricate a war in order to justify spending. I don't think that's the case. This is just straight up imperialism. The U.S. wanted Afghanistan, and maybe they were arrogant enough to think that they could take it. There seems to be that general idea of the United States military that they can't lose because they're the United States. I refer to the previous Millennium Challenge, where the United States ran a war game simulation against Iran. And this was like in 2002. And in that simulation, the United States lost. In fact, they were completely devastated. They had basically their entire naval contingent in the Persian Gulf wiped out in only a few days. And then, in order to keep up the charade, they ran the simulation again and made all kinds of alterations of it to make sure that the United States won so that they could get the result that they wanted. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can actually go to Wikipedia and find a bit of history on the Millennium Challenge. So there is that kind of arrogance in the U.S. military that they cannot lose because they are America. And America is the greatest country in the world and nobody can challenge us, etc. But it's interesting to note how much the public was lied to. I mean, sure, the capitalist class could expend 1 million soldiers' lives. They don't care. They'll rake in all the profits. But maybe those people who have to die in the war might want to know that they're essentially dying for nothing. They're dying for a war they can't win, dying for a war that they had been lied to about, and the public had been lied to about. You kind of need the public to join the military in order to have a military. And any bad press for the military, like not winning, usually would hinder the efforts to recruit people into that same military. So you could see how this all kind of wraps up into this nice package that is really just class interest, has nothing to do with any kind of conspiracy or any fabrication of war to justify war spending. The reason is always there. The reason may not be what we think it is, or may not even be what we're told, but it is always there. And it also shows that the United States government fought for 3 years to make sure this information did not get public. So at least, some thanks should go to the Washington Post for revealing this kind of significant information. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.